Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. Sean Weisbrot is the founder of SparkVox, which turns content your executive team already makes, call recordings, etc., and turns it into LinkedIn posts in their voice. He is also the host of We Live to Build, which is a podcast that has 235K subscribers, 320 plus interviews with 7 to 9 figure brand owners. He's created over $100 million in value to his network, generated over $15 million in revenue for his businesses, and raised over $8 million for his businesses and clients. Angel invested in 9 companies, 2 exits, lived in China for 10 years. He's fluent in Mandarin, Vietnam for 5 years, Portugal now for 4 years. And today he's focused on growing his newest business, SparkVox, which turns podcast recordings into business calls, into LinkedIn content without losing your voice or sounding like AI. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So listen, I'm excited interesting background, living around various places in the world, raising capital for your own and other folks, really interested in this new venture and project, or newer venture and product you have. But before we get into any of that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm assuming maybe a serial tech founder and an international business person might have not been it when you were a kid, but you tell me.
I had no desire to be an entrepreneur until I was living in China. And it was a few years into living in China that I realized. But when I was a kid, my dad is a dentist. He had his own practice when I was a kid. I grew up watching him and realizing that being an entrepreneur maybe wasn't such a great thing because I could see his struggles. Yeah. I also saw my brother, who was a few years older than me, constantly trying to sell things on eBay. He was trying to find ways to make money. He never made anything really big, but he was always trying, and I appreciated that, even though I didn't really understand it. So I didn't really have anyone around me that was a good role model for entrepreneurship.
Wow.
Unfortunately. So I didn't know what I wanted to do.
So you were just, it was just not, you thought not that.
Yeah.
So what, I'm going to switch up my order a little bit because I'm curious. What had you go to China originally?
I kind of saw in my senior year, or my last year of university, this was 2007, 2008, I could see that something was happening. I didn't really quite understand it, but I felt like it was a bad idea to stick around. But I knew as early as being in high school that I really wanted to explore the world. And I also saw my brother getting into corporate America and realizing that that didn't look like a really good idea. So I just knew that like leaving the US was probably going to be the best option for me. But I knew that I needed to get a degree from an American university to have a chance at finding work overseas. So once I got my degree in psychology, I went to China. I actually wanted to go to Japan. And I found out about the government-run English teaching program too late to be able to apply. And so instead of waiting another year to apply, I said, screw it, I'll just go to China because it's next to Japan. Maybe like after a year in China, I'll be able to get my way over to Japan. And I ended up staying in China for 10 years. So it was also a lot of curiosity because China is very different from the US. So kind of looking back, maybe there was also a sense of like, well, if I can figure out how the Chinese people, live, maybe I can find a way to make money from like the differences between Americans and Chinese. It was all very vague. I mean, I was 21 when I got to China, so I didn't know who I was.
Yeah. Wow.
I just knew what I didn't want.
Wow. That's phenomenal. What was your first deal of any type? It could have been, early in your career, or maybe there was something when you were younger, anything you would consider a deal.
Well, like the most professional thing I would call a deal was fundraising 150,000 for a pre-seed equity round in 2016 for an American founder living in China. And the investor I found was Chinese. He couldn't speak any English. The founder couldn't speak any Chinese. And because I'm fluent in Mandarin, I was able to connect the two, and I was a part of the process from start to finish. It was 2 months of karaoke and, alcohol and tea and lunch and dinner and just spending a lot of time translating and all that. And, then it turned into this fundraise, and that was $7,500 to me. And that was amazing because, previously I was only making like $1,000, $2,000 a month, right? Because I was young in China, salaries are very low and just in general, people don't make that much money. So, $7,500 was a lot of money to me in that moment. I was like 25, something like that, 26.
Sure.
So that's my first real professional deal, I'd say.
I love it. Now, had you studied Mandarin before you went to China, or did you learn the language there?
I learned speaking to people on the street. So I arrived in 2008, and at the time, smartphones didn't really exist yet.
Yeah.
And so you literally had to buy a notebook and a pen and just walk around the street, and I would just talk to the food vendors. I talked to anybody that would let me talk to them.
Yeah.
And if I didn't understand anything they said, which is like everything, I would hand them my notebook and my pen, and I would have them write down what they said. And then I would go home and I would somehow try to translate the characters they wrote to something that means something to me. And then I figured out what they said, and then I would figure out, is this an adjective, a verb, a noun, what's the use case? And then I would go outside and I would use it. And so within the first 6 months, I was able to recognize about 600 characters.
Wow.
And I started becoming slightly conversational by that time because living in Wuhan, nobody spoke English. So you either learn or you don't. And most of my friends couldn't speak any Chinese. I mean, my expat friends couldn't speak Chinese. My Chinese friends couldn't really speak English. So if I wanted to know the locals, I had no choice but to learn. If I wanted to feed myself, I had no choice but to learn. Because you go to a street food vendor or you go to a restaurant, you go to the fanciest hotel in the city, it doesn't matter, no one spoke English.
Yeah.
So you have no choice. You have to learn, or you have to find someone that'll translate for you. And I learned really early on trying to negotiate my working contract and housing contract and all those things with my first company that I worked for, is that I relied on my coworkers who were able to speak English. And they're one of millions that could speak English in the city. And I learned that I couldn't trust them to speak for me because they didn't have my best interest at heart. They were just doing something I asked them to do.
Yeah.
And I realized that they weren't translating what I wanted them to translate.
Wow.
By the time I was good enough to understand.
Yeah.
And so then I said, I have to do this for myself.
Wow. That's amazing. I don't look back and regret much in life. I'm a very positive person, and I've had great experiences. But when I went to school, even Spanish in school was, taught as Castilian Spanish, from Spain, formal, and all the Puerto Ricans and Dominicans that I grew up with in New York didn't speak anything that was like that. And, I sort of got turned off to it. And I know, I've traveled so many places in the world, and the ability to immerse in culture, even as a visitor, whatever is, and understand a culture is so much better for the people who speak the language. So I'm a little jealous, the fact that you did that. So it's very interesting because, one of the things that's very interesting in deals is the cultural differences, right? And you mentioned on this first, small capital raise that you did, you mentioned karaoke and drinking and, and whatever. Talk to me a little bit about the differences in deal making and business, in China versus, let's say, the U.S.
I've only ever worked outside the US as an adult, right? I've been outside the US for almost 20 years now. So I may be a little bit limited in that knowledge, but I'll do my best.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, with Americans, it's kind of like, hey, I don't really know you very well. Let's shake hands and do business. Yeah. And let's get down to business. Yeah. In China, they want to know you as a person before they're willing to do business with you. Yeah. Let's say you and you might introduce me to a bunch of people that might be interested in my software after we've done this call because you feel like you know me a little bit now. But if there's a Chinese person that could potentially gatekeep for a big deal for me, they won't let me near that deal until they know me well enough to know that I'm not going to screw them or make them look bad. So we call it losing face.
Yes.
So if they think there's any chance that I could do anything or say anything that will make them lose face, they will not want to help me. They want to put the effort in to know you as a person. Yeah. And sometimes that's months and months and months of spending time together before they're willing to do any business with you. At first, it was frustrating because I was going there with an American mindset of Why can't we do something faster, right? Time is money. Let's be efficient about this. And, after a few years being there, I came around to the idea that like, actually, we should know people before we put our neck on the lines to help them.
Yeah.
Not to say that they're not worth helping, but like things could go wrong and you only have so much capital if you burn a bridge because you introduced the wrong person. And this actually happened to me when I was fundraising for other people, which we could talk about later. So spending a lot of time with you is really important. There's some things that are a little bit more nuanced, like business cards. So I left China 9 years ago. So I don't know exactly. I don't think this thing has really changed, but business cards were massive in China. Everybody had a business card for any reason, and they carried them with them all the time, and they were happy to give everybody their business card. And there's a certain way that they will give the card and a certain way that they'll receive the card. Yeah. They will use both hands.
Yep.
And something that I learned was, in again, from the US, from my perspective, what I understood was if someone gives you a card, you can take it with one hand, it's no big deal.
Yep.
But if you take a card from a Chinese person with one hand, it is so disrespectful because they think you don't care. If you receive it with grace with both hands, you pinch it and you look at it and you hold it in your hands while you continue to talk to them, they're so happy because they think you're engaged, they think you care, they think you're interested.
Yeah.
But in the US, you take the card and you put it in your pocket. If you do that in China, the deal, like there's no deal. Like you may not even have a chance to become their friend. It's done because they are just so disrespected. You've made them lose face and you don't even realize you've done it.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I've told this story before, but it's been a while. So we had a similar experience. So in the, let's see, it was actually the late 80s. We were doing a deal. We represented a U.S. company that was selling to a Japanese company, right? And the Japanese culture, there's some similarities with that, right? And yeah, we had a cultural consultant back then. Keep in mind, we're talking about the 80s, like pre-internet, like you couldn't just Google search or certainly ask chat or somebody, whatever, about, customs. Like we literally had a consultant that was hired. And one of the things they totally told us is, listen, you receive the card with both hands. You don't stick it in your pocket. You read it. You acknowledge it. You put it down on the table in front, like, that whole thing. And it was interesting because like the cultural consultant was great. We all throughout the entire deal, there was no faux pas. Everything was good, whatever. And then we finally get to the signing table. And these are times where people would be in person in a conference room and all the documents would be printed and lined up and manually signed.
Yeah.
And, we're at the signing, like everything's gone well. We haven't screwed anything up. And next thing we know, there's a commotion in Japanese, and we're like, what's going on? And by the way, at this point, I'm like a first and second year associate, so I'm not in charge of anything. I'm just sitting there running copies and proofreading stuff. And it turns out that the consultant had forgotten to tell us that we needed to get ceremonial pen, like nice pens, and that the custom was that they would sign the agreement with this pen and never use it again. It would be a memento of the deal. Like we had regular pens, and it was a huge deal. And we literally, this is ancient history. We literally had to send somebody out at that time to fortunately, not too far from the office, there was a store that sold nice cross pens. This is like before Mont Blanc got big and whatever and all this other stuff. And we had to go buy pens, and the whole deal was held up until we brought the pens back, until we presented them, until we apologized for the failure to recognize that, and then the deal got closed. So, it reminds me, the business card thing and the pen thing remind me of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I imagine you probably brought like some sake, or you brought some sort of like Western wine when you met them the first time, right?
All of that. Yeah, I mean, and listen, there've been books, and now of course there's all kinds of things you can search on the internet about dealing with the cultural differences. But it's interesting you say that. I mean, I think it's funny because you're right. In the U.S., it's much quicker to get down to the business, much quicker to make a referral. But I still think ultimately the best business deals and things are built on relationship. It's just that a lot of times the relationship is built after, like it's not required to be done first, right? Hopefully the ones that work, you build it afterwards. So you mentioned that you've raised some money for other companies. You also had a prior venture, right, in which you raised some of your own money. Talk to me, a little bit about that journey. Every entrepreneur that I know, I think in the pre-call I was quickly talking to you about a friend of mine, who's been on this capital raise journey and has been on the verge of running out of money several times, and had to do a restructuring and whatever, and and it's almost sort of part of that capital raising, entrepreneurial journey when you play in a big game. Talk to me about your journey a little bit.
I've interviewed 320 founders, and I started my podcast when I was running that software company that I had raised money for.
Yeah.
And I ended up interviewing a lot of them that had bootstrapped to profit.
Yeah.
And what I found overwhelmingly was that the people who had bootstrapped to profit were very happy with their lives,
Yes.
and the one who fundraised were miserable with their lives. And I was miserable from my experience as I was interviewing these people, going, I think this is the wrong path for me. Maybe I should have a bootstrap business. So the preface is, if you're going to raise for your business, or if you're raising for your business, just don't forget your customer as you're doing it, because oftentimes you're so busy raising that you forget to grow your revenue.
Yeah.
And this has impacted some of my clients with their fundraising journeys, so we can go into that a little bit. But to go back to kind of after that first raise, so it was in the blockchain space, and that was an equity deal. And the guy had hired me to do industry analysis, and then eventually wanted me to create a system to help other blockchain companies launch a token and a blockchain. And I found out that he screwed me out of extra commission I should have been getting from follow-on investments from this investor, which really pissed me off, and I just walked away. And instead of giving him the thing he was paying me to build, I took that as my what he should have paid me in commission, and I turned that into a $15 million consulting business, which was my second business that I did. So some of that money was generated from the fundraising for other clients. And they were, because I had started to understand the blockchain space, because I was living in China, because I could talk about blockchain in Chinese and in English, I was this massive force that very few people could compete with to get the attention of the Chinese and the West. So I ended up helping a number of Chinese companies and Western companies raise from the other side. So I helped Chinese blockchain companies raise pre-ICO sales for their venture from Western investors, and I helped Western companies to raise money from Chinese investors. And you're going to love how I did it. So a Chinese friend of mine who could speak a very little amount of English, he had a little business, and all of the profit from his business he was buying Bitcoin with.
Okay.
And when he found out that I had done a little bit of work in this space already, he wanted to introduce me to a group of his friends who also were unable to speak English. They were also businessmen. They were also interested in blockchain. They also were in their 20s and 30s. Some of them had already made tens of millions of dollars in their 20s and 30s. And they would get together for these dinners. And the dinners were $1,000 US per person. This is inside China, 1,000 a person. And one person would pay for everyone else's meals for that night. You'd have like 10, 15 people at a dinner. And they'd get together, they'd talk about the newest projects coming up, and they would, show off their cars, and we'd go to KTV, karaoke, and have massages, and you name it. We had fun.
Right.
And one person would pay for the whole night. Luckily for me, they're like, he's the foreigner. He doesn't have to pay for this stuff. Because I was broke. I couldn't afford to pay that for, I would be in debt after one dinner.
Right.
So knowing this guy and meeting these people was something that helped the consulting business to launch. And so the very first time I went to one of their dinners, I had already picked up my first client who wanted to raise for their ICO.
Okay.
And so I went to the dinner. I was there with him for a few hours. By the end of the dinner, I collected $100,000 for that client because here's this really interesting guy. He's a foreigner. He understands blockchain. He understands us. He's fun. He's easy to chat with. He understands our culture, our language. And I leveraged that to raise money from them.
Wow.
And so I went to a few more of these dinners. And one of the guys ran a blockchain media outlet in China. Okay. He had hundreds of thousands of people reading his articles and following what he talked about. And a lot of what they did was review upcoming blockchain projects. And so I said to him at one of the dinners, I go, look, I want to make you an offer. I go, I get 5% commission for all the money I raise. If you're willing to review these projects that I'm working with and you're willing to promote them and your audience is willing to invest in them, I will share with you 50-50 what we collect.
Okay.
That one offer, and I spent some time with him. I got to know him, right, before he agreed to do it. In the 6-month period that we worked together, we raised $5.5 million from his audience. Huge opportunity.
Sure.
Right? And I saw that opportunity because I understood, like when I was younger, I was a leader of a community. And then my first business, I was running an event company in China that had 700 people attending the events. And all of the opportunities I got around the government and the media, and I know we didn't really talk about this, but all of those things that I did with the Chinese government told me that people want to know you when you're in charge of something, when you're the founder of something.
Yeah.
right? And so I knew the most important person in that entire group was this guy because he was the founder of something. And so hundreds of thousands of people knew him and trusted him. Even if they didn't know him and could shake his hand, they knew of him and trusted his word. And so I knew that leveraging a relationship with him would be the most important thing I did. And I was right. So when you're trying to raise money for your company, what have you, if you are visible on LinkedIn, if you are visible on social media, if you have created something that people want to know about, and having a podcast is an amazing way to open doors. Like I've literally talked to billionaires. I should have no right talking to these people. I've talked to people that, they're doing $100 million a year from their business, or they've sold their business for hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't deserve to be talking to those people based on what I've done, but because I have a podcast, they love to talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, people say to me all the time, oh, Corey, your podcast has become pretty popular, whatever. Okay, great. They assume that business from listeners is the biggest value of the podcast. And what they don't understand, do we get some of that? Sure. All right. But what they don't understand is actually there are two things that are even bigger. First of all, the ability to stay top of mind at scale. Okay, because that was always like, when I moved from being small where I'd be able to stay in contact with all my referral sources and connections and clients, right? You don't even need a lot of scale for that to become impossible to do, right? And then, I remember I had this gap of, frankly, a decade where I was frustrated. I'm like, how do I stay top? It's pre-internet, it was pre-whatever. How do I stay top of mind at scale, right? You couldn't really do it. And then, I did the book, the podcast, I understood authority marketing. Okay, so you have that. But then it's the other thing, which is, I think, the biggest value of a podcast is what you mentioned. Is I get to meet people and have guests on who, if I was trying to get in to see them, to pitch myself, or even just to build a relationship, or even to try to help them in some way, there's so many gatekeepers and things like that and whatever. But if they want to get exposure for their business, their product, their new book, their, whatever, or they just love talking about what they're doing, to get them on a podcast, and then it's an opportunity to meet great people and build relationships with them. So, I just wanted to put a highlight on that point, because the guest, most people that don't understand podcasts don't understand that the guest access and relationship building, if you do it right, especially for somebody who's not selling $39 online products or whatever, right, who's building like relationships for high ticket, kind of things, is the biggest thing. And people don't understand that about podcasts. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, so I first started my podcast when I had my tech company, and the goal was to build a waiting list for the software. So my guests were my ICP for the software.
Yes.
And I built a waiting list of 250 companies that had 5,000 seats waiting to test out my product. And, it was amazing. And then when that company unfortunately had to shut down, I lost my purpose for the podcast, but I kept going anyways.
Yes.
And I'm glad that I did, because it's been really valuable, because in the building of this new software, I get people that, some of them are running 5, 10, 15, 20, $50 million a year software companies. So I can get their advice for free. During the podcast, I can get their advice. And after the podcast, I can keep getting their advice. And some of them want to use my product. So some of my guests, they're going to use my product, right? They're going to be my first clients. And it's because I've started to build a relationship with them. Right. Some of the clients that I've worked with to help fundraise, they're guests from the podcast. Some of the investors I introduced them to, I interviewed on the podcast.
Yes. So I want to, we're going to get to what you're doing now, and I love, I want you to definitely talk about this venture and the product. Before we go there, let's just, on the last company, I know you raised some of your own, capital, and you had a journey around that, right? And we sort of alluded to. Give us a little bit more about, about that journey. And you sort of mentioned the bootstrapping versus capital raising, conversation. And so give us a little more color around that, because I think it'll be valuable to the audience. And then we'll get to talk about what you're doing now.
I originally thought I would bootstrap the business because I had made a lot of money from the previous, from the consulting and the fundraising. So I thought I definitely have enough money here that I can start my own tech company, and surely that's gonna 100x my stack, right? That was the thesis. Very, very wrong, which is one of the reasons why I suggest people to be very careful about fundraising for a business, because you're more likely to succeed now that AI has dropped the cost of launching to basically zero. With that said, my last business, I had fundraised. So the idea was, I've made enough money that surely I can skip the pre-seed, I can skip the family and friends, I could maybe skip the seed round, and I can keep a massive amount of the equity for myself until the Series A when we've got users and revenue and we've proven ourselves. And that was the thesis. Well, because I had never done it before, I didn't know what I didn't know. It cost me $650,000 of my own money. I originally only planned to do 125.
Right.
So it cost me $650,000 before I raised my first money from an outside investor. So that was like 3.5 years of suffering and struggling, and a pivot because of COVID. But it was a good pivot. Because before the pivot, investors didn't care. After the pivot, investors were very interested.
Got it.
And so I had raised $1 million. So I put 650 of my own, and then I raised $1 million for a seed round. And one of the investors was a previous client of mine in the blockchain space. He's from India, and he actually flew me to India along with a few of my friends who provided other services to him that I connected them to him, which was pretty cool. We went to India for a week together there. And then two of his friends also came in to invest. So they each came in for about 100,000. Oh no, he came in for 100, and then his friends each did 50,000. And then another investor of mine was this blockchain VC, British guy living in Switzerland. I had gone to a blockchain conference in Malta in 2018 with a few people from my team, and I had been chatting with him online. I flew from Malta to Switzerland. I spent the night there. Next morning, I met him in person, and then I went on to Paris and saw friends and went back to Asia. A year and a half after I met him in person, he invested. He invested 50,000, but then he went and did an extra 100,000 later on. And then the last investor was a friend of mine who I met from the group in China, who lived in Vietnam, and he's one of the reasons why I moved to Vietnam and lived there for a number of years. Although I also lived there because my wife is Vietnamese.
Okay.
That's a much more complicated story. So he's the one that screwed me. So he said, I'll come in for $500,000, and then he only gave me 100,000. And he swore up and down for a year and a half that the rest of the money was coming. The other investors, they sent me the USDT immediately.
Yeah.
They all sent me USDT. He did a wire transfer. He was also heavy into crypto, but he sent me 100K. We started budgeting, ramping up. We already had our plan to hire more people. We were trying to move forward. That money, that $1 million, was meant to get us over the hump, to get us live, to get first users, to get feedback, and to get to revenue so that we would raise before we ran out of money. But that $400,000 gap between what he promised and what he gave was a massive part of why we failed. Because I tried to get other investors. So the guy who did the extra 100,000, I hit him up twice. I said, look, we're in dire straits. I'm trying to pay salaries. I'm trying to keep going. And he got his LPs to approve an extra 50K and then another extra 50K. Because to my knowledge, the other investor who I had known for 6 years had promised to find the money and give it to us.
Yes.
And yet he didn't. And so I was trying to keep the boat going, or try to keep the train going. And I tried to find other investors. And what I didn't realize at the time was they heard, we're dying, we need money. And so no, right? Nobody wants to fund a dying ship. Even though we were building something incredible that was going to compete with Slack. In 2020, we were looking to build something that, like, we knew that the future of work was remote, automated, and intelligent. And we wanted to build something that competed with Slack, that made all of your tools integrated into your chat, so you didn't have to leave your chat with your team, because all of the tools now, you have to go between the different applications. It's really bad for your brain to constantly switch context. So we wanted to build everything into your chat, and then we wanted to build AI on top of it so that it could understand all of the data coming in between all of the applications and the conversations with your team, so that then it could act as a manager and an assistant if you couldn't complete the task on your own, or with the help of other people. 2020, this is my vision.
Yes.
It would cost $1 billion to get there. So $1 million was nothing, but we had no choice. We had to prove ourselves, because I had never started a tech company. I didn't know anything about it. So I had to prove myself. It was going to take years, right? I didn't know OpenAI was going to come out 3 years later, right? So that was our vision, and we weren't able to complete it, unfortunately. The podcast was a really great way for me to get therapy for the stress. I mean, I had panic attacks. I had anxiety. It was awful for years. And I suffered like horrifically over the loss, over having to fire the team, over the money that I had invested. All of it was very painful. And COVID, and I lost my wife, and I gained a bunch of weight. Like I didn't lose her. We got a divorce. Just an awful time, honestly. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I moved to Portugal, to kind of like get a new start. Like mentally get away from the space I was in. COVID put me in a bad place. The business loss put me in a bad place. The divorce put me in a bad place. And I think it's fair to say the business died 50% because I didn't know what I was doing, and the other 50% because my investor didn't give me the money that I needed to actually support me. Yeah.
Anybody who's in the entrepreneurial world understands. I remember they've done this in various places, but I remember one particular event. I've been a member of Entrepreneurs Organization since 2008, and it's great to be with a bunch of other entrepreneurs who are true entrepreneurs. You need $1 million in revenue and above, so you're running a somewhat real company, and many of them are a lot larger. And when you really get in there with everybody, like nobody's got a straight line up, right? It's like it's never up and to the right consistently. And I remember there was an event called the Night of the Living Dead, and it was really because a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we'll share our challenges, but it's always just a preface to the hero story, a preface to the comeback story, right? And so usually it's I had a tough time, I was whatever. But this was like, no, everybody's gonna talk about like the toughest times in their lives. And it was actually strangely a combination of disturbing and very comforting, because it was like, it was one of those key I'm not alone moments. Like every entrepreneur has been through, like major stuff, right? And and it's why when people that don't know any better and they see then you have a successful venture, or you eventually fight through and build whatever you've been working on or whatever it is, and then you're lucky, you're overnight success, you're whatever, and and then even when you say you don't understand the 10 or 20 years of the ups and downs I had, they're like, yeah, whatever, right?
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupford.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back for the show.
So I guess, leading into talking about this current venture and the products and services you provide, let's access it through the point of, okay, so now you've been through this journey, you've had, your challenges, whether it's around raising capital, it's around learning, how to build a business, whether it's around personal stuff, whatever. Coming into this business, what did you learn? What did you say, hey, I'm going to do differently, or coming into building this business, and then we can talk about what it does and the service, product and service you're offering.
So by spending 5.5 years of my life with that team, I learned how to do back-end technology. I learned how to do front-end technology, quality assurance, marketing, sales, product, segregation of duties. I learned how to operate a business, but unfortunately didn't have the opportunity to actually execute on that. And so with AI, because I have that knowledge, I can do all of those roles myself with the AI's help. I don't need a team to do those things. And the consulting business had a few freelance business, service providers that like I didn't want to do that thing, so I would just have them do it and I would pay them. But essentially they were their own boss. I like a lean business. And so my goal with this business is to do 10 million a year and not need another employee.
Wow.
It's extremely ideal. I don't think it's possible, but the profit margins are high enough that I think it could be doable. If not, I could hire a few key people that would be really important.
Yeah.
Because I don't know how to build an agentic team yet. I've interviewed a bunch of people that are doing it, that are building it for their clients or building it for themselves, and I don't quite understand it just yet. But I think that's an important step in being able to do that. I've learned how to automate, but agents are they're a step up for that, for sure.
Yep.
I think the knowledge I have around AI and the use of AI for coding, for developing, for design, for marketing, sales, product, for all of that is probably a lot more developed than most of the people I talk to, except for the people that are building agents.
Right.
So it's extremely helpful. So what I learned was you can move really fast. Where when we were building, like before AI, I was like, oh, this is something that takes years to do.
Yeah.
And now it's like, if it takes you longer than a month to do, you shouldn't do it because it's too long. The industry will be different in that month.
Right.
You have no choice. You have to push forward.
Right.
I came across a competitor. They've been building this for 18 months and they haven't launched. I'm like, I built it by myself I built the first version in like 2 days.
Wow.
But I've been tweaking for the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks as I've been talking to people and doing demos and all that, right? Getting customer feedback, et cetera. So I'm like super early with the journey, but I could have never imagined years ago that I would be able to do any of this stuff. And so what AI has done for me is make it so that all of my dreams can come true within minutes of me having them.
And tying it into the conversation we had earlier, right? It's easy to bootstrap for longer, right? I mean, it's less capital intensive. You need, you're not. I mean, to build technology, and also the number of people you don't need, right? It affects that conversation as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we were building years ago, okay, you need to have a server, and the server, you need to have like preparations with the cloud or a non-cloud with like multiple servers and load balancing, and you have to know like how much you're going to be able to use, and like there was so much work around that. And I created the first version of the website on Lovable for free using their free credits. I moved it to Cursor, which I pay a $20 subscription for. I hosted on Netlify, which has a serverless architecture, and Supabase, so it's a free serverless architecture to start, and Supabase, which is a free database, scalable database system using Postgres. My monthly cost for running the business is like $50 right now.
It's amazing.
And that's excluding the token costs for running the prompts and the models and all of that stuff.
Sure.
But but when someone uses it, I'm getting paid.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter, right? But so like the core, non-customer input costs are like extremely lean.
Wow.
And I know that Netlify is going to scale with me. Supabase is going to scale with me. Maybe I'll have to start paying for some things, but it's like $10 a month, $15. Like it's so inconsequential. Where like in the past, we were dealing with HubSpot, and it was like $1,000 a month for a HubSpot CRM that we never even got to really use.
Right.
We were just throwing money away. Paid $15,000 to a designer in the last business, and we did 2 redesigns because when we pivoted, right, we went from mobile to web, and like I built I wanted to build an admin dashboard for the last business, and it was 3 months of collaboration among 4 people to do. I built the entire dashboard in 5 minutes.
It's amazing.
And I already had all of the data sources and all. It's like AI has made it so that you can do anything you want faster than you can think of the idea.
Yeah.
That's what I've learned so far is like ideas are cheap, execution is cheap. Like, why the hell aren't you doing it? Why aren't you making money?
Love it. All right. So listen, obviously we talked about it a little bit in the bio and you mentioned a little bit, but let's delve into what does the current business do? Who does it serve? Give us a lot more detail about what you're doing now.
So I got the idea for SparkVox when I was trying to be more visible on LinkedIn going back a few months. And I'd spent a few months before that realizing that people on LinkedIn were generally copying and pasting ideas from ChatGPT into LinkedIn, and so everyone lost their voice.
Yeah.
And that to me was unacceptable because I've been a writer my whole life. I've been a linguist my whole life. I speak multiple languages, read, write, and speak multiple languages. So the idea that I would give up my voice to an AI disgusts me. I said there has to be a better solution, but there's still a problem of nobody wants to write, but they need to be visible on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
They have to be able to be visible in order to win those deals, whether it's a customer or it's an investor or it's a potential talent that they want to hire.
Yes.
Right? You have to be on LinkedIn. You have to be visible. This is for founders. This is for execs. This is for boards of directors. This is for GTM. This is for HR. It's for everybody in your team. Everybody needs to have a presence on LinkedIn. And so what I realized through doing demos and talking to people was you should be able to use the content that you're creating from your sales calls, your internal trainings, your podcast appearances, or if you're a business that runs a podcast for building your sales pipeline like I do, you're constantly creating content in the form of a recording, in the form of a transcript.
Yes.
And so instead of sitting down and writing new things, which you don't have the time to do and you don't want to do anyways, by taking this transcript and using my tool, essentially you're able to do the whole thing. So it takes your transcript, it looks for the most important moments, and then it gets rid of the ones that aren't absolutely really valuable. And through that curation process, it cuts down to only a few really important posts, and it turns them into 3 different themes. So each time you use a transcript, it's 3 different themes. It's a dynamic system that I developed. And so you have a content strategy for that piece of content, that transcript that you've created. And so you can then post, and LinkedIn says, LinkedIn doesn't say, but my research has proven on my own account that 1 post a day is the best. So if you do an hour transcript, you'll maybe get like 8 or 9 really great posts from us. So that's like a week-ish of content. So you do a few of those in a month, you have a month's worth of content. And every time you're posting, you're getting an opportunity for the people you want to know about you to find out about you. And every day you're not posting is a day that you're losing out to your competitors for being able to get discovered. And so I built this tool to help businesses to become more visible more consistently and do it in your own voice while removing all of the nonsense that makes it sound like an AI created it. And so I've also created a voice profile so that the more times you use it, the better it gets at knowing who you are and writing in your voice. And it even goes so far as to tell you what it knows about your tone and your speeches, your tone, your terms of phrase, and all of the things that make you who you are. And so that's what I've built.
Love it. I mean, it sounds amazing. I mean, it's interesting because, we do a lot of posting online. I'm just thinking about myself, right? We do a lot of posting on LinkedIn, and I've got a team, right, that I that helps me with that, and they are taking stuff from our podcast transcripts. Years ago when I published my book, right, there's a lot of content they pulled out of my negotiating book, right? And again, Exactly. It's my content, my language, my whatever. So it's not, I'm not posting some generic thing even before, AI made it easier. But yeah, so having a tool that pulls from your material, right, that keeps your voice, but, does automate, because also, listen, I got to tell you, my marketing team wants me to, like all the time, wants me to do more. And listen, it gets
exactly
the stuff. I mean, yes, we do, we'll do a post promoting this, more than one post promoting this episode, right? But, when I do something, when I'm like at a conference or at an airport or whatever, and I do, a direct post, that gets the most views, the most engagement, the most, all that stuff, right? But I'm not the kind of guy who I like to be present with people, right? So I'm not the kind of guy who always, has my phone out, right? So, to have something that helps that, but that's not some, AI generated slop, right? I definitely see the value to it. No question about it. So kudos.
Thank you. It's been a fun journey so far. I really like, I used to be much more focused on marketing and sales in the last business. And what I found is because I'm now able to be technical and I learned to read the code by working with Claude, I've come to really like the product side more. So if I were to hire anyone, it would be on marketing and sales.
Yeah.
And I would just focus on products.
Yeah. Yeah. Got it. Love that. So you're in Portugal now. Yeah, it's, so China, Vietnam, Portugal, what do you love about Portugal?
I love that there's like 300 days of sun.
Yeah.
And I love that it doesn't snow in Lisbon.
Yes.
And I love that it's a single flight away to where my parents are. When I was living in Asia, it was 3 flights in 36 hours, and now it's 1 flight in 8 hours.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you say. What did you say about the weather and lack of snow I have here in Southern California? But there's, but it costs me.
Exactly. I love how people here appreciate relaxation.
Yeah.
They're willing to give up wealth. To be fair, a lot of Portuguese people are not wealthy. But a lot of Europe in general, salaries are very, very low. But they also don't have the same problems that Americans face in terms of like being afraid of going bankrupt if you have to go to the hospital to take care of yourself.
Right.
You know, I could talk about this all day long, and that's one of the reasons why I choose not to live in the US, but people in Europe it seems like they appreciate life more. I feel like Americans are focused on work, and I think Europeans are focused on life, and I really appreciate that. It's hard for me to change myself towards that. Because China was like super hustle mode. They're like way more aggressively like in hustle mode than Americans are, which is kind of funny to see. And Vietnamese are as well. So like Portugal is the first place I've lived where people are like, yeah, let's just relax.
Love that.
And I just really, I'm trying to appreciate that, especially as I start my family.
Interesting. All right. Before I ask you my final two questions, is there anything else you want to tell us about, whether the business or, trends you're seeing or anything else that we haven't covered so far?
The trend I'm seeing is, especially like if you're a business that's raising money from investors, I've started to see people talk on LinkedIn about how, as an investor, they're expecting their founders to be visible on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And if you're not visible, they may not even take your calls.
Yeah. It's interesting for me. I mean, the whole authority marketing concept, and for me, LinkedIn is like we used to actually do some stuff on Facebook and Instagram. We just stopped. We're just like, it's all LinkedIn in terms of social media. And then we post some of the podcasts up on YouTube, but for me, it's all LinkedIn, and it's made such a difference, raising my profile, staying top of mind. People are always going to look you up on LinkedIn or Google you, and then, your stuff's going to come up. So I totally get it. And it's made a huge difference in my business. Going back, let's say 10 years ago when I first started doing this stuff, and then did the book and the podcast, and then, it's made listen, obviously underneath it, you have to do great work, and you have to, deliver, and you have to be responsive, and all those things that basic business does. But, but there are plenty of people who do all that, and they have no exposure, right? And no, and it does create perceived credibility. Now, again, you got to back it up, but the fact that even if I do a talk at a conference, okay, those people see it, but then if I obviously promote that on LinkedIn, not just that I spoke, but hey, here's some of the lessons, here's whatever, it expands the reach of that. So listen, I'm on board. I get it,
I'll tell you something that's really interesting to me is, I've been working on this for 2.5 months now, and I use the tool to post my own things. Sometimes I'll write myself, but sometimes I'll post, from like my own interviews, like my own conversations, I'll turn into content. And at the bottom, I'll say like, hey, my tool wrote this for me, right? And I've already gotten 2 people who reached out to me saying, hey, I want to know more about SparkVox. I booked calls with both of them already and talked to both of them. They both run like agencies, and they're interested in using it for their clients.
Yes.
I've had 2 people approach me to be on their podcast, which I've already booked for both of them. I'm their guest, right? They want me to guest. And someone reached out to me with a Substack following, and she wanted me to give her a quote about AI, and she's going to post, like in a week, she's going to publish her article on Substack, and she's going to give me a backlink to my website. This is all because I'm more visible on LinkedIn, and it's all because my tool is enabling me to post more stuff.
Love it.
And this is just the beginning. Oh, sorry, one more thing, the most important thing. I do a lot of testing with it. And I always hit the approve button. Just, got to test everything all the time. Got to make sure nothing's broken by accident, right? Because I'm not a tech guy. Yes. And I accidentally, sometimes I'll delete the posts that I approve because some of them aren't relevant. One of them was about AI destroying accounting in 20 years. I didn't realize that this thing was not deleted. And a woman with 700,000 followers on LinkedIn requested to connect with me. And I didn't know why. And I was like, okay, fine. And then LinkedIn sent me a notification like a few days later saying that 21,000 impressions had gone to this post. It's my best performing post ever. I didn't even write it. Yeah. I got 12 comments saying, you don't know anything about AI. You don't know anything about accounting. You don't know anything about anything. And yet here, this woman has an AI that helps CPAs to upload their transcripts so they can get better at coaching. And I said, hey, I noticed you have this tool. My tool can let them take the same content and turn it into content for LinkedIn that gets them the next client. And she's like, I'm very interested. Let's have a call. So I'm probably going to end up having a referral relationship with her and could potentially have hundreds or thousands of clients out of this because I posted something that I shouldn't post.
I love that. Love it. Love it. Well, great stuff. So listen, if people want to find out more about you and about SmartVox and this and the tool, where do they go?
So they can go to the website, sparkvox.io.
SparkVox.
They can also
SparkVox. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, sparkvox.io. And then they can also check me out on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll have the links for that stuff. And if they like it, they're interested, they have a company, possibly a team that's interested, I'm happy to do demos with people.
Awesome.
I love to build relationships, want to know the customer and what they want, what they're looking for. So yeah, website, LinkedIn. I also have a podcast on YouTube at We Live to Build. So I'm sure you have the links in the show notes. They could check that stuff out.
100%.
I don't talk about deals, but I talk about everything else related to business, and I interview business owners that are actively doing those things, especially heavy on AI and agentic work right now.
Love it.
For the interviews.
So, Sean, the final question on my podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And that means to me everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
I've lived for freedom. My first action as an adult was I went to study abroad in Europe for 2 months. I wanted to just see what the world was, because I grew up in a place where like everyone thought America was the best country. And I'm like, why? Like, have you been, do you have a passport? Have you been outside? Like, do you not have the freedom of choice to go somewhere else and see if that's true or not? And I've lived my life by that idea of I should have the freedom to choose what I do, when I do it, where I do it, and who I do it with.
Love that. Sean Weisbrot, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast. I appreciate you having you on, and I appreciate you sharing SparkVox and your deal making and entrepreneurial journey with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to cupforlaw.com. That's cupforlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.